A tenant in New York City was paying less than $29 a month for a unit that she lived in for more than 60 years in the absolute worst case of rent control that I've ever read. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over one of my favorite topics on this channel, and that's rent control. Now, I had read a lot of bad stories about, tenants who are paying almost nothing to live in extremely expensive areas. And, I remember I read this story years ago, and, I had to do a little bit of research in order to find it again, but I was able to find it, and this is the absolute worst case of what happens with rent control that I've ever read. Okay. So when you read a story like this, you start to see all of the flaws in the rent control system and exactly why it fails. So there's this tenant, and she passed away back, I think it was 2018, and that's when this story was written. But she had lived in this unit for more than 60 years, and she was under a rent control system, and was able to keep her rent super low because of it. And her rent was less than $29 a month. Okay. Now, I don't care what part of the country you live in. You could live in the most remote, small area in the cheapest state in the entire United States, and still it would cost more than $29 a month just to provide basic maintenance for any building, for any unit. There is no building in this entire country that you can live for that cheap in. So just think of the landlord basically was subsidizing this lady by hundreds, if not thousands of dollars every single month that she lived there. Okay. But, it's an interesting story, and they do have some pictures and a video here, and I'll play that video for you right now. You saw the video. Now, before we get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Would you live in a rent-controlled unit? I mean, think about this for a second, right? The reason that she was staying in this place, and this place was a dump, okay? It was an absolute dump. It didn't even have hot water in it, okay? And from what they say, it didn't even have heat. So would you stay in this place paying this cheap rent, basically living in a cubby hole in the inside of an apartment building just because the rent was cheap? I mean, if you're telling me, oh, well, this saved this person from homelessness, but we have no clue what this person's income was before they passed away. Okay. She could have been doing great. She could have been making six figures for all we know, or she could have had a huge pension or whatever, right? But I'm just saying that the cost savings for her might not have been worth it to be living in a dilapidated mess with no hot water and no heat. So, ridiculous situation. Let's read the article. This article is coming from the New York Post, and it says, "This late actress had the best rent deal in New York City." And it's dated May the 9th of 2018. So this is from a few years ago, like I said. So let's get into the article. When Patricia O'Grady moved into the top floor of a Greenwich Village walk-up in 1955, she and her three roommates helped sweep the hallways in exchange for a discounted rent of $16 a month. The unit was bare, no more than floors and walls, so the girls, all aspiring actresses, slowly improved it themselves, installing a sink and other modest amenities. While the roommates moved on, O'Grady never left the unit, and for that she received the ultimate New York City prize: unbelievably affordable rent. Until March, when O'Grady, 84, was fatally struck by a car just a few feet from her home, she paid $28.43 a month for the apartment. So, yeah, there's a lot just right there in the first three paragraphs of this story. So, the lady was 84 years old and had lived in the unit since 1955, okay? And this was in 2018 when they wrote the article. So, it's 45 years from 1955 to the year 2000, right? And then you have another 18 years on top of that if you go all the way out to 2018, right? And you're talking about somebody right there who spent nearly 60, I think it was 63 years living in this same unit. Now, I don't know about you, right? But my life has changed a lot in the last just 20 years. Okay. When I was 20 years old, I'm 43 right now. But when I was 20 years old, I was in a completely different situation than I'm in right now. I wasn't married. I didn't have any children. I didn't have a dog. I lived in a different city. Actually, I've moved, four different cities since then. So, that's just giving you an example of all the different things I've done. And, I've had like 5, 6 different jobs in that time. And this lady, right, she's got this cheap unit and she's holding on to it with a death grip, right? Limiting all of the possibilities in her life, never, moving on to a better place, never seeing new things. And, New York is a great city. It's very diverse, etc., right? But do you want to be locked into the same apartment that you were living in when you were 18 years old for the rest of your life? No, that is horrible. And they said it right there. The place was a box. It didn't even have a sink in it when they moved in. So her roommates moved on a long time ago, and she just stayed there. I mean, to me, it sounds like a horrible situation that I would want to be out of. But no, she wanted to stay so she could keep that cheap rent. But let's continue. I consulted with an attorney to find out if this rent was possible, recalls Adam Pomerantz, who bought O'Grady's building, which also houses his business, Murray's Bagels, in 2002. It was legit, he found, but using a rent control formula worksheet, he was able to increase her rent a whopping $1.98. It had previously been $26.45. Yeah, so there we go. Here's the first problem with the whole rent control system, right? So when you read all these articles and they're like, oh, my landlord increased my rent by 40%, right? Well, 40% of $28 ain't enough to even bother anybody, okay? When you're talking about even doubling your rent at $28, that's not a huge rent increase. Even if you said, I'm going to increase her rent by $500, right? I'm sorry, is that 1,000%? I don't even know what 1,000% would be. It would be around a $300 increase, right? Let's just say, for an example, 1,000%, right? Her rent would still be super duper cheap for the area that she's living in, which is Greenwich Village in Manhattan, in one of the most popular areas. Her rent would still be super cheap if you increased her rent by 1,000%. So these rent control formulas, they do not work when you're in a situation where the landlord was super friendly and didn't increase the rent for a long period of time. I guess all the way back to the 1950s, okay? O'Grady was early with her payments, Pomerantz says, in part because despite the fact that his tenant can handle their rent and downstairs at the bagel, hand in their rent downstairs at the bagel shop, O'Grady insisted on mailing her check. She was the only one who walked to the corner to mail it, says Pomerantz. She was very quick paying her $28. Well, she better be quick. I mean, there's no reason why she couldn't pay that, okay? She is 84 years old, likely getting Social Security at that point, and her Social Security payment makes way covers more money than that, okay? And she still had plenty left over. But could you imagine being an 84-year-old woman living in this box with no heat and no hot water? That's ridiculous, okay? I couldn't imagine my grandma living there. So this lady really did have a sad life trying to hold on to this rent control unit. Meanwhile, pay attention, they said that, this guy, he bought this building back in 2002 and she passed away in 2018. So for 16 years, he was paying, all the maintenance and utilities and everything, keeping the building in shape so that she could live there. He was subsidizing her by hundreds of dollars every single month just for her benefit. Okay? So when you get this cheap rent, somebody's paying. Somebody always has to pay. That is the true fact behind it. Now, he might have been able to write it off as a business expense, And that's kind of a sad way to look at it, really. Oh, well, the only way this lady can stay here is if I write it off as a business expense. I mean, come on, man. This isn't reality. This is a fantasy world that tenants want to live in, where they have these super cheap rents and somebody else is paying for them to live there. In addition to possibly being the cheapest unit in Greenwich Village, the apartment may be New York City's last cold water flat. It had neither heat nor hot water. There were, however, two working fireplaces. O'Grady was so set in her ways, she fought Pomerantz anytime he tried to update or even make necessary fixes, such as putting floorboards over gaping holes. When Pomerantz attempted to install proper heat, he recalls, she pleaded with him. What you're doing to me is torturing me. Please leave the apartment as is. I'm at peace. Now you wonder, what is the logic for her not wanting repairs and maintenance and updates done? And then you remember that prior to 2019, New York City had rules that allowed landlords to be able to bring rents up in order to cover the cost of updates and improvements that you make to the property. So she knew this. She knew this and insisted that he not make any repairs and keep the property in an old, dilapidated, obsolete fashion so that she could maintain her cheap rent. This is how bad it is, right? And you see this in a small scale. You see all of this in a small scale all throughout all the places that have rent control. You see tenants who don't want repairs and updates done because they know their rents will be increased. Okay, you see tenants who don't understand that, hey, if we moved on, we would have more opportunities in our lives and we would be able to do more things, because they stay in their units for decades, if possible, because they know, well, I won't be able to get as cheap a rent anywhere else. So yeah, you end up in horrible situation. And you see landlords who have to subsidize this cheap rent for these tenants, and many times it ends up in them going bankrupt. Now, in this situation, it sounds like the bagel shop, the commercial property on the ground floor, was able to keep this entire building afloat, plus any other units that were also in the building that, were paying closer to market rate rents, hopefully. So yeah, I mean, this tenant, she had a horrible life. Okay, she was living in this place with no hot water, no heat. At 84 years old, it was in horrible shape. You saw the video; it looked awful inside. She never moved on with her life. It doesn't look like she had any family or anyone else living there with her in this horrible studio place. So yeah, it sounds like an awful, lonely, horrible life, and that is the curse of this cheap rent that this lady had. She was cursed by it. Okay, cursed by the rent that she thought, was a blessing. Isn't it funny how things work?